My name is Byron Calomiris. I was a member of the 491st Bomb Group, 853rd Bomb Squadron, and I was the Assistant Engineering Officer.
Tell me how old you were and where you were living when you joined the service.
I lived in Manhattan, New York City, and I was 24 years old when I enlisted.
Why did you enlist?
Oh, I guess just the thing to do, you know. Everybody was in the war, and I just wanted to get in, so I didn't have to. I worked for Brewster Aircraft at the time, and I was exempt. So I had to get around that somehow, and I joined up. In fact, when I enlisted and I went up to get sworn in, they wouldn't take me because I was 2B in the draft, and I had to change it to 1A, and I went into the draft office there, and I said, I want to get my, I don't know what they call it, my classification changed to 1A, and the old man there says, pulled out my jacket, and he looked at it, he says, Sonny, stay where you are, you're important, you don't need to go into war. So I left disappointed, went downstairs, had a hot dog and an orange juice, and then I said, I'm going back up and argue with him. Went up there, and he wasn't there, and there was a young girl there, and I said, I want my classification changed. She pulled out my jacket, changed it to 1A. I went in there, raised my hand, got sworn in. That was it.
Tell us the key things you remember about your training in the United States after you went in.
Well, the first, I joined up on December 11th, 1942, and I was activated on March 3rd, 1943, and told to report to Yale University. And I was in civilian clothes. I got there maybe on a Friday or Thursday or Friday, and they were going to get together on Sunday and issue uniforms and tell us what to do. In the meantime, I learned real fast, you stay out of the way, because the sergeants were trying to grab us and have us move mattresses around, things like that. So I ducked out of those as much as I could. And Sunday, when we went into the assembly there, they told us that they had changed the rules a little bit. They figured that they got to make soldiers out of us first, so they shipped us to Boca Raton for basic training. And I was very happy because this was March and it was cold in Yale, and Boca Raton was nice, warm climate. So I was there for 6 or 8 weeks, and you went through the cadet stuff just like any place else. You're an underclassman for the first 6 weeks, I guess, and then you become an upperclassman, and you can haze the rest of the guys. And then from there, we went back to Yale, and I was there for 20 weeks. And on September of 44, I guess, I got my bars. And my first assignment was to go to Boeing Aircraft School at Seattle, Washington, to train on a B-17G. Then I was assigned to Peyote, Texas, 19th Combat Crew Training Group, where I was maybe the 18th Assistant Engineering Officer. Got the night shift, hardly did anything, just sat around freezing. It was cold in those hangars in Texas at night. And I tried to piddle around and help the mechanics get up there and try to take a nut off a exhaust stack or something, but I really didn't have much to do. And then the orders came through to go to Pueblo. And when I met up, and I was assigned as the engineering officer for the 853rd, and I met up with, I guess he was a major then, Steffi. He became a colonel afterwards. And he said, what do you know about B-24s? I said, not a thing. I just came out of B-17 school. So he said, well, you'll learn. And I went through the third phase training at Pueblo. And then we got assigned, I got assigned to an airplane. They flew me over. That was the crew that, in fact, the airplane was brand new B-24J, and it had a logo on the side, a painting called Parsons Chariot, because Warren Moore's father was a minister. And Jack Taylor was a co-pilot, and I forget the names of some of the other crewmen. And then we took off. We went to Harrington, Kansas for staging. And then after we were there a week, and we couldn't get off the base because they had some kind of a spinal meningitis or something, and they wouldn't let us off the base. So then we went to Morrison Field, West Palm Beach, flew there. And from there, we took off and went to Borinquen Field, Puerto Rico, British Guiana, Georgetown, British Guiana, Belém in Brazil, Natal in Brazil, flew over to Dakar, and then from Dakar up to Marrakesh, and from Marrakesh up to Nuki, where we were picked up. We stayed one evening, I believe, and then we were picked up by a lead ship that led us to Metfield, and that was our first base. During the trip over, we aborted, I think, 3 times, if I remember correctly. Twice because the gyros tumbled, and because I was just sandbagging on the plane. I wasn't a crewman. I would try to be helpful, so I would stand there by the nose wheel and tell the pilot his nose wheel was down or up. And I remember those times when he aborted, it scared the heck out of me because the nose wheel would go down and all I'd see is an open hole there. And I'm standing there and I'd wonder what happened. And then he'd say the gyro tumbled. And then one time we hit a bird and just did a little damage to the cowling. This was in Marrakesh, I believe. And we stayed at Marrakesh for about 4 or 5 days because of weather. And as I remember, and the co-pilot and I have an argument over this, he said he knew where he was going all the time, but I said, no, you didn't. You had your briefing, and I wasn't privy to the briefing because I wasn't aircrew, but they told you where you were going for the first hour. And then you opened up secret orders that told you where your destination was. Because when we left Marrakesh, I had no idea we were going to England. I thought we were going over the Burma or China or whatever, or Italy. And we wound up in England, and I remember on that flight, I was trying to be a good Joe. I traded places with the bombardier or somebody, and I rode the nose going up there, and boy, that was cold. It was drafty and cold, I remember that. And then we landed in Newquay, took off, we got to Metfield, and we started painting the colors on the tail, I remember that. And I think our group got into their first combat before D-Day, and I remember the first crew we lost, the pilot was a fellow by the name of Musette, and I don't think he ever came out of it. I don't think any of them were POWs or anything, but that was just, these were the what they call the milk runs, but flak was pretty bad anyway, and so I was there all the time, and our bomb dump exploded. You know about the bomb dump at Metfield. I believe that was in July, but I don't remember exactly. And I was in charge of supply for our squadron. I mean, tech supply, and I was over by the supply shack, which I don't think was more than a quarter mile to a half mile from the bomb dump. And we're standing there fascinated by the explosions and listening to the noises. And then all of a sudden I realized, hey, this isn't so safe. I could hear zing, zing, you know, and I said, hey, that has to be flak. So I decided the shrapnel. And I decided we better get out of there. So I got in the weapons carrier and offered the guys a ride back. And they said, no, Lieutenant, we want to watch some more. And next thing, a big explosion, and my weapons carrier was full. And we drove back to the safer area. And then I guess we got orders to move to North Pickenham. And what I remember about that was that the North 492nd boys had a black stripe and silver tail, while we had the green and white. Well, they were such a hard luck outfit, and the story was that the Germans were gunning for them, so we didn't want to change our colors. We flew with the green and white for quite some time before we switched over to the silver and black. In fact, one fella reminded me that the way the silver and black was put on was every time we sent an airplane to sub-depot, it came back with a silver and black, which we were supposed to have. But we did. The thing that surprised me in training, I had the impression that our crew chiefs and the crew members, we had about 4 per airplane, would stay with that particular ship. But they instituted a new system called flight line maintenance. And that meant that only the crew chiefs stayed with the airplane, but everybody else could be pulled off and work on any other ships. So when we had engine changes, which we did in the hangar, we yanked all the fellows out, get as many fellows as we could get to do the engine changes. They could change an engine. They had these quick change units, and they could do put 4 engines on in a day, you know. And if you got 200 hours out of an engine, boy, that was a good engine. And that's about all I remember. And there are a lot of other little incidents, like little minor accidents, like maybe running your oxygen card into an airplane accidentally, things like that. But I've backtracked a little bit. We lost quite a few airplanes at Met Field because the 853rd was from the supply shack where I was. They were lined up past me towards a big hangar and towards the bomb bump. And then I think it was the 4th or 2nd that was the other side of it. And both of us got the brunt of the explosions. The shrapnel actually made it look like somebody had taken a shotgun and fired at the airplanes. So we rode off several airplanes. And I remember an incident. I was sort of gung-ho those days, and I told my guys, you better get in there quick. Let's grab all the things that were loose so we could pull out of the airplanes and put them on our supplies so that we'd be the squadron to have everything that you needed to keep your airplanes going. And Captain Bandine at the time was the group engineering officer. He came around later and he says, I know what you guys have been doing. He says, I ain't going to say anything, no names or anything. He says, I just want to see all the stuff returned to the regular supply, and there'd be no recriminations. So we were good boys. We returned about half of it. We kept the other half.
What was a typical day for you?
Well, get up early in the morning. Being the assistant engineering officer and in charge of supply, I really didn't have as heavy a load as Captain Replogel, who was the actual engineering officer, although I really think the line chiefs were the ones that really did the work. But I'd get up about 5, get out on the line, and when the crew chiefs were running up engines, and I used to like to do that, so I would usurp some of their things. I said, let me run up the engines. So I'd run up the engines. Oh, and another thing, 3 of our colonels got their own little toys. Steffi got an A-20, Strauss got a P-47, and Watts got a Fairchild, one of those light radial engine Fairchilds, like civilian model. It had some designation in the Army, but I don't remember what it was. But Parmalee didn't have anything. Steffi used to fly an A-20 when he was in anti-sub patrol, so he liked that airplane. We couldn't spare anybody to crew the airplane, so I took it over, and that was my baby, and then I had my fun running up the engines every so often. And Steffi showed me how to start. It was a very peculiar A-20. It wasn't per the factory. In fact, I talked to some Douglas people, and they don't believe it. It didn't have the twin-row engines that the A-20 normally has. It had a single-row engine that I think came out of B-17. This was a war-weary. And it had a single-row engine, and when I took the wheels off, because Steffi complained about the brakes, I took the wheels off to check the brakes and found out it didn't have the brake that the TO said it should have. It had a brake just like an automobile, regular shoes. And they were soaked with oil, so I had to take them off and put them in, soak them overnight in some kind of a solvent, then put them back on again. I never adjusted a brake like that before, so I'm going by the book, turn the star wheel, get it right. Steffi never complained after that, so I guess I did it right. And then he gave me a ride. He didn't take me up, but Colonel Strauss wanted to fly the airplane, so Steffi said, okay. And then he said to me, jump in the back seat. And he gave me a chute. And while I was up in the air with Strauss, I realized that if I had to jump, that chute wasn't going to do me any good because he never adjusted it, and the straps were hanging loose. I would have gone right through the harness. But it was fun. And that's basically what I did. And I just made sure that there was supply. Once I had to drive over to, I think it was Watton or whatever it is, to pick up some quick engine changes, arranged to have them shipped to us. And the other time, the other times I would have all the manuals. So if the guys were looking for part numbers and stuff like that, I did a lot of that stuff, digging up the part numbers, digging up information for them, try to be as helpful as I could. But you just think back, you say, what did I really do? I can't remember what I did. Sounds like I was just there for the joyride.
Sounds as though you had a lot of responsibility in dealing with a lot of people and with a lot of technical materials.
Well, that's true. There was, but you know, it's so far back now. It's just like childbirth. You know, they say that if a woman had to remember the pain that she goes through, she wouldn't have a second child. You don't remember things as clearly anymore. I guess there was a lot of responsibility, and I got in trouble a couple of times with. We had these, these wooden tanks that we came over with in the bomb bays for extra fuel storage to make those long flights. And they were just sitting out in the back of our supply shack, just rotting away. And I mentioned to our sergeant one time, I said, you know, we ought to take the hardware off of that and put it in use in the supply shack. But I didn't ask for anything else to be done. And then next thing I know, Colonel Steffi came to me one day and he says, you know, we traced those tanks to you guys. I said, what tanks? What are you talking about? And he said, well, the IG was here and he was over the dump, and somebody had dumped those tanks, you know, threw them away. And they traced it to our squad. And I said, well, what can I say? My mouth dropped, and I don't know. I didn't get penalized on that, but I know that was a black mark against me. I didn't know anything about it.
What lasting memory stands out in your mind?
The bombed up explosion was one. Oh, and the crew that flew me overseas, Warren Moore and Jack Taylor, had to ditch their airplane in the channel. And when they did, on one of their missions, it was one of their early missions, 5th or 6th, the plane broke in two, and the 4 enlisted men in the back were lost. And the radio operator and the flight engineer got out, and so did the 4 officers. But by the time they get picked up, they lost the flight engineer. So only 1 enlisted man came out of that accident, and the 4 officers. And Jack Taylor eventually became a first pilot and had his own crew. And I've kept in touch with Jack Ollie. We don't know what happened to Warren Moore. I know he's alive. I think he flew in the Missburg raid, but he came out of it all right. But I think he was POW because, you know, that's the other thing that stands in my mind. We had 30 or 31 airplanes up that day, 9 from my squad. I think originally 10, but 1 aborted. 9 went on the mission. None of them came back. And that was a black day, and I got the nasty job of collecting all the clothing and all the things there, and you know, getting them over to headquarters so that they could ship them back. Don Allen was the armament officer in my squadron, and I was the assistant engineering officer, and we were the 2 lowest ranked lieutenants on the staff. So we got all the details. I was officer of the day maybe twice a month. I'd be convoy officer. I'd be go with the medical officer when he's doing medical checks. And one of the things I never liked was it only happened once. They did a check on the enlisted men's foot lockers because there were a lot of sunglasses and other things that had been missing, so they had us go through, and I had to be the officer to go along with the sergeants that did the checking. And, well, that was, I guess, par for the course if you're a low-ranking officer. Now, that's the only thing I remember.
One last question.
Yes, sure.
What do you want the world to remember about your contribution to the war effort?
Well, what do I want the world to remember about my contribution? Well, just that I was ready, willing, and able to go when they needed you. I didn't have to have anybody put a gun on my back and say, you go. I was willing to go, and I'm glad about that, and I'm proud about it. It's hard to say, what did you really do? You know, we all did little thing. I'm sorry I wasn't one of the crew. I wanted to be a pilot, but I couldn't pass the eye exam. And I had one opportunity to become a flight crew. When I got my bars, I could have been a B-29 flight engineer, and I applied for it. But if you don't know the Army system, you don't get what you want. I didn't realize that when you apply and you fill out the paperwork that it's automatically going to be given to you. The sergeants decided to go alphabetically, so they assigned the people alphabetically.